Thank you so much again for joining us today. The idea really of this session is to have like very open and candid conversations from different perspectives and different stakeholders in the Indian healthcare ecosystem, going broadly from founders, but also to investors about some of the key trends, what they're seeing, any sort of advice that they have, but also any common pitfalls that founders building their life sciences companies in India can avoid. And so with that, I just want to go over and introduce sort of the panel members, but quickly want to say I'm Anya, I'm the head of Illumina Accelerator in Cambridge, UK, and our role is to create companies and enable companies in the genomic space globally. We invest in all sorts of diagnostics, therapeutics, synthetic biology, consumer genomics, tools, and bioinformatics companies. And our deadline for the accelerator is October 1st. So if you're a company building anything with a genomics component, please do let me know. I'll drop my email in the chat as well. But also this is meant to be a fairly engaging conversation. So as and when you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand or even drop them on the chat. We'll be spending 45 minutes with the panel today and be taking questions for the last 15 minutes. So please do engage with us. And with that, I would like to hand over to Sunil to quickly introduce himself.
Thanks, Anya. Hello, everyone. My name is Sunil Thakur. I'm a partner with Quadria Capital. Quadria is one of the leading healthcare-focused private equity fund in this part of the world. We've been there for now 13 years, managed $2.6 billion. We look at all kinds of healthcare models, right from pharma, life sciences, to healthcare services, medical devices. We also have a VC arm called HealthQuad, through which we invest in the new age healthcare models. I look at the investments for Quadria in South Asia.
Thanks, Sunil. Over to you, Hitesh.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Anya. Nice to be part of this fantastic session. I am Hitesh Goswami. I'm co-founder and CEO of 4Base Care. We are alumni of Illumina Accelerator. We are a precision oncology company based out of Bangalore, and we develop genomics-based solutions to personalize treatment of cancer patients.
Brilliant. Thank you for that introduction. Kavita, over to you.
Thanks, Anya, and hi to everyone. My name is Kavita, founder CEO of Zumator. Zumator is in the immuno-oncology space. We are headquartered in the US and we have labs in Bangalore in India. My previous startup was a biosimilar one, now in the novel oncology space. I believe this is going to be an interesting conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And last but not the least, Ashan, over to you.
Thank you, Anya. Fantastic being here. Hi, everyone. I'm the founding partner at an early stage venture capital fund called the Bharat Innovation Fund. And we invest in deep tech startups, fairly sector agnostic, but are looking fairly seriously at the healthcare space as well, and startups that may emerge out of India, which could be globally competitive and building strong tech around which their offerings are run.
Brilliant, thank you. And I just want to say a massive shout out to the Bharat Innovation Fund team to helping us in organizing this event as well. So thanks very much. Okay, with all introductions sort of out of the way, we should probably get started on I would really like to invite comments on understanding what are the opportunities really in India when it comes to healthcare? What are the key trends that you're seeing in the space? So anyone who's feeling brave enough to start first, please go ahead.
Thanks, Anya. Maybe I can take this up. I think there's a huge opportunity from healthcare perspective, from diagnostic, therapeutics, and digital health perspective, especially diagnostic because market itself is huge. In India, we're looking at a huge population where diagnostic could be one of the services. Therapeutics, because there's a huge need for getting affordable treatment solutions or drugs, which are fairly unaffordable right now. So Indian companies into developing affordable drugs in India for the patients would be a great advantage. So I think therapeutics, diagnostics, and digital health are three main areas of interest or opportunities right now.
Great, thank you for that, Hitesh. Anyone else who would like to contribute to that?
So I think, kind of taking it from where Hitesh left off, right? So I think you've seen movement in India all the way from traditional pharma, traditional vaccines to novels, and I would say novels even before like generics and then newer generics, so to speak, and then going into complete novel space. So I think the trend is growing at the pace that the global trend is moving. And I think there's a lot of things that folks in India have done, whether it be entrepreneurs or bigger biopharmas, onboarding multiple startups they've done, is to kind of cut short this time that it would take to be at that cutting edge. So I think there's been phenomenal movement in India, and it's a great time to be in right now in the startup space.
That's great. I think Ashwin and I actually had a conversation about this a few months ago about the market really in India being so big enough, you've never had to really go elsewhere. Like we have entrepreneurs out of the UK and we have to really push them to think beyond the little island that we are, because the market's just not big enough. I think that's a huge advantage when it comes to India. You have a huge domestic market. And so there's a lot of innovation, obviously, that we're seeing come through. But I don't know if some of the investors would like to comment on some of the key trends that they're seeing.
Yeah, so maybe I can take that up, Anya. So, starting with how we see the market, and it has changed dramatically in the last few years, and more importantly, in the last 1.5 years. So the big theme or the trend is that, government has started to now drive the entire demand narrative, because now they're coming in as a payer and right across the chain from services to products. They will start to drive the entire demand narrative. The second is the entire digitization intervention that's happening across the value chain. How people are now using digitization to solve broadly those three big issues, which is access, affordability, and quality, and that permeates both services as well as on the product side. The third big theme or trend is consumerization of healthcare. Healthcare has started to move out of hospitals. It has started to move out from the hands of the doctors because of this whole new information age. The tools that the consumers are now taking up, they are now sort of taking healthcare in their hand. The other element to consumerization is that there are quite a few parts of the healthcare value chain or the care pathway which can be solved by the patients themselves. More importantly, on the prevention side, wellness side. So that advocacy, the information that consumers are using to take care of the health, that's becoming very, very important. So you don't need to have clinical intervention to improve health. You can now have a consumer model intervention to improve healthcare. So that's the third big theme, and things like rapid diagnostic and all are part of that theme. The fourth is this entire supply chain disruption that's happening, and on the supply chain side, the importance of self-reliance and localization, especially in emerging markets like India. That again is driving a big trend, and that's very, very relevant when you talk about the life sciences pharma. This whole PLI scheme around the API, where we were importing substantial part of our key raw material from China. So that localization theme, self-reliance, more importantly, if you want to provide healthcare to the needy bottom end of the pyramid people, the cost has to go down, and therefore localization becomes very, very important. So that's the fourth important element. The fifth important element is this entire outsourcing concept, where now people are working on federated models across services and products, where the theme is specialization, where the theme is cost cutting or cost optimization. And that again is very relevant when you talk about pharma, given that India is now becoming the outsourced hub for pharma, be it across, biologics, biosimilars, we talk about CRAMs, CROs, CDMOs. So everything that we are seeing is in the realm of these five big 10. So, all that we define as an opportunity in the sector will fit in one of these five trends.
Got you. No, I think that's a very interesting perspective, actually. So I have a few threads that I've taken out of what you've just said, Sunil, but I'll come back to them. Ashwin, did you have any final thoughts on the matter?
Yeah, let me just take off from what Sunil said, right? Broad, I think 3-4 things that we are seeing. If I were to zoom out and think of the last 20 years in India, I think the first set of big investments really went into establishing physical infrastructure. Hospitals, hospital chains, multi-specialty, single specialty, so on, right? Focused, vertical focused, and so on. But a lot of it was on physical infrastructure. And I think the last 5 or 6 years, maybe a little bit longer, has been about setting up digital infrastructure in healthcare. And you've seen the emergence of a lot of digital healthcare plays, be it home service, be it scheduling, be it EMR, HIMSS type of plays. And I think it's perhaps the time now, and we're seeing the signs of that, of true innovation really kicking in. If you look at the last 15 years, again, from a pharma perspective, it's been a lot about generics, right? In terms of where the capital has gone in India. And I think true innovation is just beginning to kick in from a tech standpoint, right? Business model innovation has happened. But from a technology standpoint, we are seeing a few companies emerging, be it devices, be it in therapeutics, Zumator is here, be it even in some amount of diagnostics, I would say, with the advent of different techniques. I think that the time is now. And I think that's going to be the third phase, if I could imagine, of what is going to happen in healthcare in India. The second trend broadly is, and I've said this for the last 4-5 years on every panel I've been sitting, I made it a point to say, listen, we invest across sectors, and the healthcare sectors, and specifically the customer in healthcare, very often the doctor and the hospitals, have been the last to the startup party, in a sense, in terms of adopting solutions. And every other sector, enterprises have been adopting very rapidly. I think we're again seeing early signs that hospitals are having conversations with the startup world, learning how to engage with them, and realize that there's value that they could, bring for them as well. And so that's a fairly encouraging trend, and it's also driven by the fact that a lot of medical professionals are actually going and becoming advisors to startups, so they understand a little bit of that. The third piece, and again drawing from what's happened in other sectors, I do see that what the India stack has done for fintech in India is going to play out perhaps in India on the healthcare side with the digital stack that is getting set up through the National Digital Health Mission. And so it's exciting to see what could emerge as a result of both that, as well as what artificial intelligence has been doing in other sectors. I do think there's a big play in healthcare as well, across, be it diagnostics or therapeutics. So these 4 trends to me point to a rosy future for, or at least provide healthcare opportunities that we didn't see earlier that are emerging now.
That's amazing. So I think, just to potentially summarize some of the key insights from here, one of the things that I'm hearing is, cost. Cost is of real importance in India, no matter what you're really building in terms of a solution. And it sounds like from a regulatory perspective, it's evolving. So there's further guidance for healthcare companies in terms of a regulatory perspective. But what's quite interesting for me is learning about the shift, right? And talking about some of the low-hanging fruit, things that have been effectively fulfilled. And yes, I definitely wanted to touch upon this area about, the transition from generics, which has been sort of like the a fairly big part of the Indian sort of pharma business, and how that experience has been from going from generics to then, you know, creating your own sort of like biologics, etc. And what does that mean for the life sciences sector, and what's needed for it too? Like, so things around like funding, like this is something that I really would like to touch upon, because the funding that's required for building a novel therapeutic is far higher, right, than having some generics in the market. And then another topic that I would also like to touch upon is IP. What does that mean for startups operating in the space, and also investors? Like, how are startups creating barriers to entry, and cost effectiveness? So maybe if we start with one of the key things, which is around ecosystem and funding. Like, tell me a bit more about the big sort of ecosystem drivers for healthcare companies with a special perspective from financing. What should startups be doing to raise financing in India for their healthcare business?
Sorry, Anya, was that the question for me?
Yeah, go ahead. So now I feel like you're best placed to answer it.
So what all should an entrepreneur do, if that's the question that you want an answer for? So from, am I right?
Yeah, and what you're looking for as well from the entrepreneur. Like, what are the key criterias that you're evaluating under for them to successfully raise financing?
No, so the first and foremost is the go-to-market strategy. That needs to be very, very clear. And again, I'm talking just from a pharma life sciences perspective. That India is not an easy market when it comes to pharma life sciences. Services, digital, it's still easy to penetrate. But pharma life sciences on the generic side, you know, that's an easy one to crack. But the most difficult one is, you know, what Kavita is trying to attempt. And that is where we believe that we have all the skill sets. I think what we need is the entire ecosystem to come together. Now, if I talk from an entrepreneur perspective, what we look for an entrepreneur is very strong go-to-market strategy. That is very, very clear, and certainly doesn't need to be 100% foolproof GTM. Even 70-80% is good enough. I think the right balance between trying to modulate the entire commercial aspect with the technical aspect, that's very, very critical. Most entrepreneurs who we have seen on the life sciences side, they tend to be more technical and mostly wear a technical lens to a product, and in many times they basically lose the sight of the commercialization. So that's very, very important. The third element is engaging with the right stakeholders, in terms of commercialization of the product, most importantly with the government, because government can make a big difference in the acceptance of the product, in terms of taking the product to the market. So these are the three big elements that we see. What the additional aspects that we look for is the promoter's ability to raise more money. It should not stop at us or a single source. So the capital raising the capital raising ability of the promoter is very, very important. Unfortunately, our ecosystem is not as vibrant as the US, and that is where good models like Zumator and all, they tend to sort of struggle. Good product, everything great, but the ecosystem is not there, because where we fail to take a call is who's going to hold the baton when we have to come out.
Yes.
An world market means a very vibrant VC market, a very vibrant PE market, and most importantly, a very vibrant capital market.
Yeah.
Because the buck should stop over there.
Yes.
India is far away from that kind of an ecosystem.
And I was actually going to ask you a very pointed question around, is there enough financing for startups?
Not at all. I guess Kavita or Hitesh would be best placed to answer
Yeah,
from an
please do
academic
tell
perspective.
me your experience raising
Yeah,
capital.
I think what we need to understand is the quantum of funding that a life science or a biotech startup would require is very high. And the kind of funding that you get in seed round in US goes into millions, whereas what you would get here is in a few hundred thousands. That is not enough for you to build and grow. So that is one of the limitations, I would say, in the funding ecosystem. Also, I would say the percentage of VCs who actually understand the space. We have someone like Sunil and Ashwin who understand the space, but percentage of VCs overall who understand the space is much lesser compared to what you have outside India. So these are the challenges which is there. And also, I'm sure Sunil and Ashwin would agree that the traction that they would require is much higher than so risk taking appetite, right? Of course, it's different over here. So these are the challenges that also we had. But I think the ecosystem in India is very supportive right now from biotech life science perspective. You look at incubators available, the government grants available. For us, we had access to Illumina through the accelerator program that worked for us phenomenally. That opened up the global network for us, right? So the thing is that utilizing and leveraging on these opportunities, be it working in incubators, accelerators, leveraging on government funds. We got startup Karnataka Elevate grant also. We are now a winner of DBT grant also. So taking advantage of the government funds will help you build a traction with which you can go to the VCs, right? And then raise the next round of funding. So that's how it has worked for us. But I think that ecosystem support you should take initially and leverage on it, which India has right now.
Brilliant. Thank you for that.
On a lighter
Kavita,
note, I think Sunil's named everything that a founder should do and what the investors should do. So now it's time to take a daring bet, Sunil. Right? I mean, you. So yeah, like he, kind of in a very curated 5-pointed manner said, right? There is the challenges of the ecosystem in itself. There is also the go-to-market strategy, and most importantly, the visibility to scale. And where is that quantum of financing, especially when we have to scale in all of the newer technologies? And I can speak from experience, and Ashwin's here on this panel, right? Like, we've raised multiple rounds of money, and Zumator's gained so much traction. We're probably the only people in India doing what we do in the immuno-onc space by means of a novel asset. But future funding, so to speak, right, as aspirational as we can get, is still out there, and it's across the seas. And so to bridge that gap is definitely a collective responsibility. Really, it's a responsibility of the startup ecosystem. It's a responsibility of folks having money to make sure it panders to the right kind of audience. So I think it takes a lot to come together. It takes a village. And my last comment on this is that every time people talk about intention, location, right, and aspiration in that order, these three things could always be swapped around, when companies scale, right? And Zumator is a good example. We were India-based. We flipped to be a US entity. Now we intend to raise money, globally. There are challenges in doing that because of location, right? And so these are things I think founders have to think about, even as they kind of intend to set up base, whether it be at an incubator or whether it kind of needs to see global reach. So that would be my comment on that. Thanks.
I really like how candid this conversation has been, because and so maybe I'll just ask one like one very small question around this funding space and let it rest then. But do you think there needs to be external capital coming from the US or Europe into India, some of the big funds like Arch, etc., coming into India? Or do you think there is a requirement for homegrown capital? I mean, India has a wealth of capital, potentially not arranged in the VC perspective to deploy in a particular way, but India has a wealth that needs to be tapped, and probably the tech sort of market has been able to do that successfully. Unsure about the biotech space, but do you think which of the two needs to happen? Like, external capital coming into India, or India's own capital being deployed in sort of
So when it
more
comes to capital
talent?
requirement, it's never either or, right? It's both. The more the merrier. So you need a healthy mix of both, if you ask me honestly.
Yeah.
And the way I think about it is, and somebody spoke about, the quantum of capital, but it's also the quality of capital, right? Which means that you need patient capital coming in, because biotech ventures typically take a little bit longer. And if you have capital going into fund, let's say an Apna, which becomes a unicorn in 3 years, and then you're saying, hey, but what may, if I invest in a life sciences biotech startup, it's going to take much longer. It is but natural that you'll see some of the capital flowing into something that is going to turn around or provide returns on that capital very, very rapidly. And some of these numbers are just astounding: 3 years, 4 years to go from 0 to $1 billion, right? But having said that, I think where I'd be a little bit more positive is there are cycles in my mind, and I think we're at the start of a cycle where there's going to be significant foreign capital as well coming into India to fund healthcare startups, because the opportunity space is pretty large, and we are already seeing some of that happening. I'm sure Sunil is as well, perhaps through funds, sometimes directly, but I think at this point of time it's predominantly through funds such as ourselves rather than directly. But I think the next step will also be a lot of direct investments from international funds in Indian startups in the healthcare space. On domestic capital, my sort of suggestion there would be, while you will see or where a lot of money is sort of emerging in India seems to be from the family offices, right? When we raise capital as a fund, I think that's the new category of investors coming to the fore in the last couple of years. But I don't know whether it's an ideal match for the gestation period of a life science or a healthcare startup as well. And I do think government funding at scale and for large sizes requires to happen more. It's happening, but at a very base of the funnel, small ticket level. And I think just the amount needs to amplify a lot more. I also want to, while I have the chance to speak, take an opportunity to expand on something that Sunil said, right? And healthcare startups and what do we look for? I think one of the key things, entrepreneurs and their understanding of the friction points is very, very important, which will lead to the thought process towards go to market. Because healthcare, unlike others, has got many more friction points in a sense. You have a consumer of a product, and the consumer of the product is not the person who chose to, let's say, take that product. It's a doctor who prescribed it to him, and neither is he or she paying for it. It's an insurer who's paying for it, right? And then you throw into the mix a hospital, you throw into the mix government and regulatory, and this is a very multi-stakeholder type of environment with many, many friction points and, or let's say, many moving parts. And for a healthcare founder to understand each of these and how to navigate within each of these is something that we look for when we invest. And somebody who's done their homework well or who comes from the ecosystem typically tends to have a greater knowledge on this piece.
Maybe, Tanya, I would just like to add in over here. I think as the startup ourselves, like Kavita and I also, for this to happen in terms of external funding coming, the quantum increases from internal, we need to take responsibility. We need to show more success stories, right? For that confidence to come in. So I think that's a responsibility that is on our shoulder also equally, to be making sure that this revolution happens.
No, that's brilliant. You guys are flag bearers effectively, right? To create, because I think precedence is very much important in the case to build that confidence. So I guess, one of the things that, we've covered funding. I want to talk about talent and IP. If some of you could talk about what opportunities or challenges there are with talent in India, and also IP, as you found your businesses. Like, talk me through, like, what are your experiences of this?
Sure, I think I'll go first, considering it's a very IP-laden company, right? So even in the evolution of Zumator, be it India, be it the US, I think one focus that we had was IP needs to be located in a territory which is going to attract global attention. So it can't be siloed into, kind of licensing activities or interest in licensing activities in just regional bits, right? That was one focus that we had. So for the right reasons, I want to say our IP is located where it is, and we have opportunity to license, etc. So that is one key factor I think startups, even as they set out, need to keep in mind, that if it's going to be IP focused, then you would need to, of course, put in a lot of money and kind of allocate money to getting in the best IP counsel. That's an expensive affair. And then going to the next stage of, kind of locating that IP and therefore the potential to it. That would be my comment on IP, because this topic can be dissected in many ways and there are many opinions on that. So that's my one. And my comment on talent is that I think the more we move towards cutting edge technologies, especially in biology, talent again is global. The ability to sit in India and attract global talent is phenomenal. So I think if you're able to leverage that, you've got an amazing case to present. And so therefore, to Ashwin's point, there has to be scaled government investment even in that, right? And therefore to attract the right talent. I think if these forces come together, we have a very, very strong story to tell.
Brilliant. Yeah. Anyone else want to make some quick comments on IP and talent very quickly?
I tend to agree with whatever Kavita mentioned. I think, and then if I look at, Kavita is best placed, given that the kind of industry that she is and what she's building. But from an investor perspective, India has all the building blocks to attract the best of the talents. Our understanding of the most complex form of discoveries to the most basic one is very, very high, given that we are very strong when it comes to outsourcing, right from CROs to grants to CDMOs. So that understanding is there. I think it's because of the lack of risk appetite is why we are not seeing so many drug discovery platforms or models.
Got it.
So very clearly talent, very positive as far as India is concerned. IP, obviously, as far as the Indian market is concerned, it's not that great. But I think we are improving.
But it's also around, so what I was trying to go towards in terms of how do you protect IP in India? Are the laws strong enough? I think I just wanted to touch upon that very quickly, but
Kavita, I guess
Kavita is the right person because we're just trying to understand. I would love to get inputs, Kavita, actually.
Well, yeah, happy to share this offline. But yeah, like I mentioned before, there are, of course, strong laws that protect IP. There is a legacy of, kind of pharma to biotech that India has. And that's something, however you might argue it, some of it has to be shaken off. There is stuff that's happening that's amazing, but there is a legacy. So there is that part of it to handle. To your specific question, Anya, I think there are very, very strong IP laws, but and then of course there are multiple IP councils that you can draw down on in India, which is very strong. But I think the key question to ask for a startup is, what is the territory you're trying to leverage, and therefore where do you locate your IP?
Yeah,
right?
I like
So
that a lot.
that's a question that needs to be answered first, right? And I guess that's true of funding too, right? Where do you want to be located, and therefore what kind of funding do you want, right?
Yeah. No, I like that a lot. I feel like that is a bit of a parting wisdom here when we talk about this. Any other ecosystem challenges at all, and any common pitfalls that founders should be aware of? So I think we've touched upon location, being sort of key, whether it's fundraising or whether it's IP, etc. Anything else that we should talk about in terms of any ecosystem challenges that we should acknowledge?
Maybe, Anya, I can talk about a conversation that you alluded to that we had a while back, right?
Yes.
And there are a lot of entrepreneurs who look at India as this huge market opportunity. Just looking at disease burden, be it cancer, diabetes, and so on and so forth, and then assume that translates very naturally into therefore a dollar value opportunity, right? A big problem to solve, and therefore. But it's not as simple as that. And I think it's important, especially I hear this a lot from entrepreneurs setting up or building devices, products in Singapore, maybe other countries as well. And the key I have or the key point I want to make here is, while this market is huge, accessing it is hard. Pretty much like the reverse is hard, which is patient access to healthcare is a big challenge. But at the same time, innovator access to markets is not easy either. There are so many friction points. And trying to understand the challenges in getting to market, and I think part of what Sunil was talking about right up front on the go-to-market is about how do you actually get there and get to this huge population which is fairly distributed, and therefore capture what looks like, or a decent percentage of what looks like a big market, but is really hard. And how do the economics of that work out in terms of you're actually having to spend significantly more just in accessing these markets. So I think that's something else that entrepreneurs need to build into their models, calculations, before they actually go out there and say, here, this is what we're going to do and this is the market we're going to address.
Yeah, so that ties well into Sunil's sort of initial thoughts around go-to-market, and then sort of assessing, like from a cost perspective, like about willingness to pay. What are the reimbursement models like in India? Like, are they well established from your perspective?
I don't know about everything else, but I think from cancer perspective, the treatment perspective, a lot of the expenses are out of pocket. So maybe again, Sunil or Ashwin can share their experience in terms of insurance and how it is covered.
So if I can take that up, it's an evolving area. So far until 2018, this wasn't the insurance penetration. The reimbursement was very shallow. It was divided between a small 5-7% private coverage, and obviously you had some government agencies. But I think the big one came through the central government's initiative, through the what we call as the Ayushman Bharat, where the plan is to cover about 500 million people through a family scheme. So now that's a big push, but the reimbursement market is not very evolved, unlike say the Western market, where the insurers, they take a very active role in defining the entire care pathway, onboarding any new formulary, aligning on the companion diagnostic. So that drives services, that drives innovation, that drives diagnostic, that drives everything. So there's one important big stakeholder that takes that call. In India, it's all fragmented. So despite the fact that now that the government is in that driving position, having, managing 50-60% of the reimbursement, we don't have an evolved platform to manage the ecosystem. It will happen, as in, we should not blame the government for that, because, it's an evolutionary thing. It's just been a matter of 3-4 years. But to answer your question in a very specific way, it is fragmented. We don't have a robust reimbursement model which drives the ecosystem. It will come, but it will take its own time.
Yeah, it's evolving.
Could I add a little bit to that? I mean, I think Sunil spoke about Ayushman Bharat. I think big move. It's going to help a lot, and not just directly, but I do think indirectly seeing some signs of that happening as well, which is, yes, that takes care of a certain amount of reimbursement for a certain section of the population. But what we're seeing emerging as a result of that is that there also seem to be other financing opportunities. Even the insurance players are going into health insurance in a bigger way. We have quite a few of them who invested in us, and they keep talking to us about what they should be doing on the health side more. We saw an announcement from one of the banks today saying they're going to get into health financing, one of the large ones. I think it's Kotak Bank. So that seems to be a fairly new trend. We're seeing a bunch of startups that are trying to figure out how they can play in this whole thing of health financing, and maybe complement what Ayushman Bharat is doing, or what other insurance products are doing. And so that's the third piece that could come up. And I think finally, on the point on, is there a platform to manage all of this? I think it's important, and I'm just hoping and praying that the National Digital Health Mission, which is still in the works, at least provides a first level of ability to stitch together the various pieces of the ecosystem, so some of this can happen better. till we see it deployed, until we see it out there significantly, of course, the jury is still out, but at least it provides a promise that something is going to bring this together.
That's great.
So I have two, three divergent comments apart from the insurance pieces that Ashwin and Sunil were talking about. It's just in the ecosystem piece of it is, when it comes to startups and kind of VCs, or let's just say financing, there has to be a marrying of risk appetite of the VCs in follow-through rounds. And that is something that you are not seeing in novel spaces like ours in India. And that is the difference, Anya, you were asking about, let's say, a US or a European VC versus, VCs in India. That needs to kind of be bridged. The second part is assessing risk. In spaces like ours, it's a binary, right? And in some other spaces, there could be pivots made, post-pandemic maybe, in areas that, novel biologics companies can't make, right? So I think these important points have to be kept in mind, even when we talk about, kind of entry of startups in the India ecosystem, and what does it take to have these startups here, right? So these were the 2 points.
Yeah. And so a percentage of the fund very much being earmarked for follow-ons, and the quantum of that follow-on potentially having a fairly open conversation around what that might look like. No, this is brilliant. And I know we only have 2 more minutes until we take lots of questions from the audience, but can we have some parting advice for all the attendees to just listen into from each of you? So maybe we'll start off with you, Hitesh. So for all the founders who are potentially on this call, one piece of advice that you might have for them.
I would say chase execution, not perfection. Because no product is ever going to be perfect. It's a continuous the product will continuously evolve, right? And if you wait for the perfect product, you're never able to launch into the market, never get feedback, never make it better. So try to understand your product, understand your market, and chase execution, not perfection, is what I would say.
I like that a lot. Ashwin, over to you.
Yeah, let me touch upon the capital scarcity issue, and I don't want to leave too much of a negative flavor in anyone's mouth. I think you put out something that's high quality, you will raise capital. It may take some patience. It may be a frustrating effort, but you will raise capital if you put something that's got quality. And I do think it's pivotal times. I do think there's going to be a lot more capital available for healthcare startups going ahead from now. So be positive about things, and as Hitesh pointed out, execute and put something with quality.
A few comments if I can go.
Go on, yeah.
From my side, have a good go-to-market strategy. There's never a perfect, but a good go-to-market strategy. Build a great team, which means focusing on good people. Talent is very, very important. You should know when to pivot. That's very, very critical. You should not hang on to what you believe is the greatest idea. Always take a reflection from the market of what it is and how the market is perceiving. So pivoting, knowing when to pivot is very, very important. And capital raising, you have to be on the treadmill. It's as good or bad as the product. So that capital raising in the initial days is very, very critical.
That's so true, Sunil, because a lot of founders get so married to the idea they can't see wood for the trees. So yeah, it can be quite challenging because you want them to have conviction, but still have flexibility to take feedback. So yeah, agreed on that. Thank you for that. Kavita, over to you.
Yeah, so I think the whole startup piece of it is not like marathon running. It's an endurance race. So it's an ultra run. And more importantly, I think raising capital is definitely not a science. It's an art, right? One has to get on top of that game, which is a very different game. But I think like Ashwin and Sunil rightly mentioned, right? There has to be a good mix of go-to-market strategy, your own teams, talent, intent, and all of that content coming together, right? If that is not there, then it's a hustle, and hustles are not always good, right? So I think the right mix of it is always what's important.
Brilliant. And maybe we have one question from the audience for you, Sanu, or anyone else really. They have questions around clinical health data and why Indian doctors have not leveraged this enormous data pool to accelerate drug discovery. What do you think is missing?
Well, I think it's a case of chicken and egg. How do we educate doctors? So doctors come from a very academic, theoretical frame of mind. Not to blame, what they're doing. They are doing a fantastic job, and India is known for the quality of its clinical interventions. But I think the whole idea of augmented resources for clinical intervention, that's lacking a bit, and it starts from a curriculum. I'm not a doctor, but whatever little I know of the industry, if we start tweaking the curriculum to get doctors used to this new form of innovation, how to use data, that will help drive this whole usage of data. So there are lots of companies. We've invested in a clinical intelligence platform, which is now taking dead data from hospitals and diagnostics, curating it to make it more relevant both for the clinician and for pharma companies. So it's out there. Our capability of creating curated studies is out there. It is all about educating the doctors, incentivizing the doctors, encouraging the doctors to start using data in their intervention.
Yeah, so it's a behavior change.
It's a behavior change.
Yeah. But there are startups doing it, right? There are startups who are very much doing it.
So from a supply side, we have the capability. There are green shoots. There are models out there in the market. From a demand side, it's just the pharma institutional models which are using those studies. But for doctors to use, might take some time. But we're getting there, I would say.
Okay, good. And I know you have to drop off, so thank you
I have to.
for your time. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I really enjoyed the interaction. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ashwin, Hitesh, Kavita.
Thank you. Take care.
So
we'll continue with some of the other questions that have been posed to the panel. Actually, this is a good one, Kavita. Maybe this one's for you. From a seed stage startup viewpoint, and the money that's been raised, IP protection in territories like US, EU are quite costly. So what are your thoughts on that? Because that is it's a sort of like a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. And we faced this early on in the game too. I think there are two important things. One, if you realize that in the drug discovery space or in the novel space, if that is the space you're after, you're marking possibly 60% of the entire race towards IPs in the initial days. That's one planning that needs to be done. The second part is to be kind of associated in the early days, I want to say, with like a tech incubator like yours, right? There are parts of the development game that an incubator can absorb, and therefore some of the overhead costs can be absorbed by the incubator while you focus on, kind of earmarking monies or capital for IP. That's one way of doing it. But then if you're building out an IP game, be well assured that the largest burn would be there.
Understood. And Ashwin, this question might be for you really. So, for someone who's thinking about starting a healthcare company, what are you looking for in the team? Like, because someone's asked about qualifications, like what sort of qualifications do you think are required to start a company?
Yeah, I think it really depends on what sort of healthcare startup we're talking about, right? And I remember having a conversation with one of India's leading VCs, also sitting on Kavita's cap table a few years back, and they had an interesting observation that some of the best healthcare entrepreneurs actually were electronics engineers and not healthcare professionals, right? I don't know how far it's true today, but if you really talk about it, it's, are you a biotech slash pharma startup? Are you a digital health startup? And what are you? I mean, which type of healthcare startup are you? And while I would think that with a biotech or a pharma startup, your qualification, your background needs to be scientific, or you need to have somebody in that founding or senior team coming with very strong understanding of science. I do think when it comes to digital health or even products which are around, let's say, for example, AI and diagnosis, and other aspects which are related to perhaps using data, you need not necessarily have that background if you're able to build the team that builds those products. I think that's fine, and we've seen this also in the devices space, where you have a lot of people with electronics background coming into the medical device space because they seem to be pretty adjacent to each other. The one comment or one suggestion I would have for any healthcare startup, and we encourage this through some of the government programs I've been involved with as well, and even as a fund when we evaluate startups, is how strong is your advisory team? What is who is the clinician who's going to give you advice on areas that you're trying to address? And I think, therefore, having a scientific advisory board with well-rounded opinions and the ability to reach out to people who understand that the specific clinical space well is an important part of, may not be just the founding team, but the advisory team that you may want to put together.
Great. Thank you for that. And Hitesh, maybe this one is a bit more directed towards you, and it's for a level, for a comment on the level of readiness for personalized treatment, for personalized medicine.
I think right now we are in the era of precision medicine already, and with the kind of advancement which has happened in technology like genomics and data science, it today allows us to use this technology and bring it to the clinic, both from perspective of technology and affordability. Although of course it's not very affordable, but it's not as bad as what it was earlier, right? So we are in that area, and I think the future is precision medicine. Gone are the days where one treatment for all was going to work. Nowadays, especially we can say from cancer experience, and lung cancer is the poster boy of precision medicine today, where even in India now, I think more than 70% of the lung cancer patients, doctor would want to look at the molecular profile before starting the treatment. And with more and more case studies coming out, more and more drugs are being approved by FDA for precision medicine, right? So I think the market readiness is there. Of course, there needs to be more awareness, and for adoption, the cost need to come still down for it to become a standard of care, I would say. It's still not.
I feel like this is definitely something you're seeing in oncology, right? Because I feel like oncology has been one of the first places to really kind of make precision medicine come to life in many ways. So thanks very much for that, Hitesh. We have one question around clinical trials. Kavita, I feel like you're best placed to answer this one, perhaps. But what are the challenges? What are the problems faced in terms of like clinical trials, running clinical trials in India, from your perspective?
I'm going to be careful on this one also, because it's definitely a cross-border topic, right? So I think let me kind of take this on with specifically the space that I come from. In oncology and in the subset of immuno-oncology, when you see drug development, there are specific territories that have taken on these drugs. And like you mentioned before, Anya, there's precedence, right? Therefore, when you do clinical trials, when there's precedence, there is a different approval mechanism, or let's say there's a state approval mechanism. But whereas when you have clinical trial settings where there is no similar approved product in the space, then there's an extra layer of challenge that you need to take on, right? So for us as a company, we are poised to look at global clinical trials, right? But there would be many companies that I would think, based on, like Hitesh mentioned, kind of oncology specific indications for a particular population, a certain territory would be best poised for that. But I would always say a filter to use here is, one is precedence, the other is what is the knowledge that approval bodies would have for that particular asset, right? And that's something one will have to consider, especially a startup, because there's not millions of dollars to spare, doing experimental stuff. So yeah.
No, thank you for that. And Ashwin, maybe you're best placed to answer this. I know we only have 4 minutes, but we'll power through it. What are the best sort of like funding agencies, etc., in India for healthcare startups? Like, what are like the ones that everyone should at least think of?
Sorry, is that funding agencies? And what
Yeah,
are
it
the best
says
ones for
funding
healthcare startups?
agencies, but I don't know if it includes venture capital or not. But perhaps maybe it address both from a public and private point of view.
Sure, sure. No, I think it's important to understand who you go to for funding, and that's based on what stage you're at as a startup, really. And so important to approach the right guys, right? And so I do think that there are tons of government programs, grant programs that are run for very, very seed stage, what is typically called the pre-seed category, right? And these are run by the Department of Biotechnology. There are quite a few of them going around for various stages, to be honest. And you get grants that you can access. I think as you evolve, you move from grants to perhaps trying to get angel funding. There are a bunch of angel networks that you can access, especially when you're at the early stages and still trying to get out your proof of concept. And all that will get you ready for venture capital funding. And so my suggestion is, unless you've built companies before, you're a second time entrepreneur, starting something pretty new, it's harder to get VC funding. Show some proof points before you get there. But fortunately, in the healthcare space, unlike many others, you do have access. And even once you're mature, you do have access to a ton of grant funding. And we keep having this conversation, Kavita and I, that listen, in healthcare, doesn't matter what stage you're at, go and try and get non-dilutive funding, grant funding. We had a company in our portfolio many years back called Consure Medical. They got a US FDA approval. Half the money that they raised to reach that was equity funding from VCs, and the other half was just grant funding and awards and that sort of thing. And so it just is a lot more rewarding for the entrepreneur because grants are non-dilutive in nature. I do think those programs need to be stepped up, whether it's grant funding or government funding, but that's a different conversation. But these are the multiple funding avenues. And of course, corporate
Big
VCs.
sort of VC firms in India that they should potentially think about or approach, maybe like.
There are quite a few, right? There were 2 on your panel. So I think I don't want to call out a list of VC funds, but I just want to point out that there are corporate venture capital funds out there as well. I think Illumina has a fund too,
Yes.
but there are other corporate venture capital funds. So if you don't get it from the regular funds, and you have fewer healthcare focused VCs, but sector agnostic VCs that also invest in healthcare are the other set that you can go to. I think the harder part is if you're a biotech company, because there are fewer, it's tougher to find people with the knowledge to understand what you're doing. And some of that funding actually comes from outside the country, and there's less avenues within India.
Brilliant. I mean, we have a ton of questions, and as expected, not enough time to cover them all. But one last thought on drug discovery and the emergence of like machine learning and AI in drug discovery. Any thoughts that you've had, Ashwin, in the space?
Yeah, let me answer this. I also wanted to comment on the earlier question on data, right, which Sunil responded to. I do think that the challenge with data is it's fairly recent. There hasn't been that much data available, and it's digital health infrastructure that is creating that data pool now, and real world evidence, which is extremely important as well. And we're seeing a bunch of startups who've been doing other things, but they've assimilated this huge amount of data, and now they're figuring out how to build products that will monetize the data. And so if you really look at it, longitudinal data over a period of time, which is very important, has not been there, but that's changed now. And I do think that's going to feed into a bunch of AI startups which are emerging. And I think, yes, we are seeing proposals, let me put it that way, where there are startups that are getting set up in the cross between AI and discovery. Have we seen anything mature enough yet? Perhaps very few, and we're seeing a lot more globally than out of India. But I'm already seeing the emergence of a few which are at the early stage, and perhaps they'll be ready for investment soon, but not yet is the way I would think about it. But this is a function of the data piece that I was talking about earlier, which has now changed and which is coming to play.
In fact,
any final thoughts, Hitesh? I was just
to add to Ashwin, I think the data, the biggest challenge is it's fragmented. It's and to convert the data from an unstructured format to a structured format, it's very, very challenging, and that's one of the major reasons why even clinicians have not been able to actively get involved, because their EMR adoption is less firstly, and whatever data is there, it's very, very fragmented. You cannot capture the complete longitudinal journey of the patient from just a single source of data. So yeah, those are the challenges, but also opportunities which are there, which can be leveraged on.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's all we have today, really, from a perspective of time. We've run out of time, and I apologize if I've not been able to cover all of your questions today, but I'm sure you can connect with all of us on LinkedIn or several other platforms. So please do. But I just wanted to say thank you so much to the panel for making the time to speak with us today. It's been a fairly exciting discussion with so many different sort of like topics that we've managed to cover in the hour that we were allocated. So thank you very much for that. And shout out to the Bharat Innovation Fund for collaborating with Illumina in putting this together as well. So thank you so much, Arjit and Ashwin, for helping us do this. And shameless plug from me, if you're building a genomics company in India or outside, please do think about applying to Illumina Accelerator, and of course connect with Hitesh, because he's been through it and he can tell you from the horse's mouth what the experience was like. We provide sequencing credits, financing, coaching, and also access to labs. So the deadline for application is October 1st. So if you're considering, please do apply. But with that being said, thank you so much again to all the attendees. It's been brilliant having all of your questions, and please do connect on LinkedIn and keep the conversation going. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anya, and all the best for your new cohort.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye.